So we are a week from National Signing Day. And as you mentioned to me before we started to record, a class that was roughly in the top five in the country is sitting at 22 now in the 247 Sports rankings, number two in the Big 12 with 12 hard commits. And I got to think that this class is eventually going to be in the 20 or 22 range.
You would think so. I think Oklahoma really with all of the kids that have actually elected to hit the transfer portal. I mean, from what I've kind of heard, Oklahoma can really even take as many as 30 or 32 kids. So I think the strategy here is going to be very intriguing, I think, for Oklahoma fans to watch here, not only over the next week, but over over the second signing period, and then obviously leading up into the spring, to what Oklahoma's strategy is. It from a week's perspective to be able to get some of these kids in, get them offers, and get them comfortable with with going to Oklahoma. Obviously, we're going to see some kids, probably like I mentioned earlier. You'll see some flips from Clemson. You may see some flips from Ole Miss that we're really considering, that with Jeff Levy coming over to Oklahoma. So I think, but I would anticipate, based on the timing of this, that Oklahoma dips heavily into the transfer portal. I mean, just from that perspective, they've got a couple of receivers. Austin Stogner's hit the transfer portal. Jaden Hazelwood has hit the transfer portal. He's already committed to Arkansas. So, I mean, some of those kids have hit the portal, but it's really kind of just one of those things that they're just kind of a waiting to see situation, because obviously they certainly could come back. But I think it's going to be interesting to see what this strategy looks like for the staff and this team, to uh, how they're going to approach their first season in Oklahoma in 22.
Jason, many people liken this transfer portal to NFL free agency, and I've done the same thing,
Yep.
but it's probably crazier. First of all, we've got 130 teams, not 32. And we also have a situation where it's running all the time. Now, there is a certain deadline each summer in which you are no longer qualified or eligible to switch and play for that next team, that next school once you transfer. But other than that, NFL free agencies, what, like a 3 week or month long situation. This is
Right.
going on every day of the year.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, to your point, if that's the same, if it's the same time frame, I believe it was July 1st last year,
Yeah.
which was the deadline, which gives some of these kids a large opportunity, a large time frame to decide what they want to do. So I think, it's kind of funny, the comment that we have. This was my immediate thought. I knew exactly how many I know exactly how many kids that it looks like that Oklahoma's probably going to lose off the defensive end or the defensive line perspective. So if Oklahoma were to get a guy like Breesy over from Clemson, that would be a significant add. I've not heard any smoke about that. I'm just saying that was just
Yeah.
something. I mean, Oklahoma fans know that we're going to get one, right? I mean, Venable's son is obviously absolutely going to transfer. I mean, unless he just says, "I don't want to play for my dad anymore. I just want to make my own name," right? I mean, you would certainly expect him to come over, but yeah, it's I mean, to your point about free agency, 130 teams, with just, if last year was any indication, just tons and tons of kids, coming into the transfer portal. So, and I guess that's the beauty, or maybe even the curse, however you want to look at it. But the beauty of something like this happening in the time frame that it happens is, you can pretty much, you can put a patchwork team together based on the transfer portal these days, right? Like, before this was a thing, if Oklahoma losing a head coach this close to a signing day was almost a death sentence for the next year, right? But now you have this opportunity that you can possibly, make a makeshift. Obviously, you can't do it for a whole team or anything like that. But if you have areas of the team and areas of the program that's a little bit thinner, you can obviously bolster your team with that. So I think I mean that's going to be really big. But I think from a recruiting perspective, we've talked about this. Caleb Williams is probably the biggest, one of the biggest internal recruits that they have, and things seem to be pointing in the right direction with him. Yeah, one of the things that Bob Stoops mentioned in his introductory press conference that the players are the program. There's not a single coach that's the program. It is the players. And during Venable's press conference, almost all the players were there, and um, they all had shirts that said the players are the program. And he was one of them. And so he's had conversations with Bob Stoops. He's already had a conversation with Venable. So it looks to be in a positive direction. I would say, I mean, based on who Oklahoma has brought in from an offensive coordinator perspective, I mean, it's about as good as you could hope for, about as good as you can get. One of the brightest names brightest minds, I should say, in college football right now from an offensive coordinator perspective. So I think that will be huge, and not only being able to solidify his commitment to this Oklahoma team, but any other guys that may be on the Ole Miss staff, or not staff, but any Ole Miss players that might be interested in following him, or even some recruits that we talked about.
Do you personally have a wish list, or have you seen, based on all your various resources, pull together some sort of a list of candidates that seem to be the hot list?
So from a defensive staff perspective, the things that I've been hearing is that Venables came into this with a very specific plan. Like, he had a good idea of who he wanted to target and who he wanted to possibly have join him from Clemson. So, what I'm hearing kind of behind the scenes is he has his staff fairly well organized. It's just a matter of making the announcements. So, I think there's a lot of and these would be just two outstanding hires. Todd Bates and Mike Reed from the Clemson staff. Todd Bates is the defensive line coach. Mike Reed is the cornerbacks coach. I've heard that it's not a done deal, but I've heard some things that it looks very solid towards them being able to join the Oklahoma staff. Both of those guys are dynamic recruiters, dynamic coaches. Todd Bates was one of the best recruiters in the country. Top 10 overall, was the recruiter of the year, which is kind of a weird thing in itself to hear, but the recruiter to 2019. So I think those are a couple of guys, and there's obviously we talked about the defensive end guys coming now, but I think the defensive coordinator is really interesting. So the thing that I've heard over the last couple of days is that Oklahoma is waiting, not necessarily just for the coordinator, but there's another position or two that Oklahoma's waiting on naming that person, because those people are involved in a very, very, very important games coming up. So that lends you to believe it's within 4 teams, right? So, there's been a lot of discussion, nothing it's been extremely confirmed outside of just kind of message board and, kind of, sourcing, but that Kirby Smart really wants this is just kind of some things that I've heard. Kirby Smart really wants Muschamp to be his DC. I don't know how much truth there is to that. They're very close. And not that Lanning has done a bad job by any stretch of the imagination, but I think from what I've heard internally, he has a desire for Muschamp to be part of the staff, or even be a DC. Some of the things I've heard is he's not. Muschamp is out on the recruiting trail, and Lanning is not. So a lot of people are taking that as, oh, maybe Lanning would be interested. From the outside looking in, it's hard to envision that. I think from my perspective, just thinking, what's the value of going from Georgia to Oklahoma, unless he feels like he's kind of being pushed out situation. So, I mean, obviously, I think Oklahoma, he's being paid around 1.7, 1.8 million right now. I think there's some thoughts that Oklahoma might be able to go a little bit higher if that's what's happening. I mean, if Oklahoma was able to secure those three guys, I mean, that would be excellent from a defensive side. And so looking at the staff, Mark, it's very interesting. It looks like Oklahoma is, besides the offensive coordinator hire, it looks like that Oklahoma is by and large keeping a lot of the existing coaches on staff. DeMarco Murray, Joe John Finley, and Bill Bedenbaugh all have been out recruiting with Venables. So obviously, you would assume that those three guys are going to remain. So I think there's a couple of spots on the offensive side that will be interesting to see how those are filled. The wide receiver coach, Dennis Simmons, was previously in that role as one of the lead recruiters as well. There have been some discussions that Malcolm Kelly might have an interest in coming over from TCU to really, a lot of people think one of the better up and coming wide receiver coaches in the country. Um, and then I think what does Oklahoma do from a quarterback coach perspective? That could be something that's added to Levy's role. Certainly that was part of Riley's job, as he was, obviously the head coach, offensive coordinator, and quarterbacks coach. So it will be interesting to see if Oklahoma would be interested in bringing in a quarterback coach, or if they would potentially just add Levy's roles and responsibilities. So college football playoff that are potentially going to come over basically after that. Um, so we'll see how that transpires. I think if you don't hear my idea here, Mark, is if you don't hear anything on in any news on the defensive coordinator hire within the next, I don't know, I would say probably 3 to 4 days, maybe even sooner than that, then um, then maybe there's some legs to this either Lanning rumor, or someone else that's coaching on the between either Alabama, Georgia, Michigan, or Cincinnati. Not sure who else it would be. If I'm being honest, just kind of looking at who's there and who has some sort of a link to the Oklahoma program right now.
So it looks like Riley lost out on his bid to bring Bedenbaugh to USC. I got to think that was a priority for him. He's one of the best.
It definitely was. I think obviously when Riley left, he all of these guys that he had on his staff were invited to come over. Some obviously went over immediately. Some just kind of waited it out. And then, so I think the thing with Jamar Kane was, he didn't feel like he was in position where he could um, where he could wait any longer. And it's such a tough position for these assistants to be in. They don't have a job. They're being offered a job. Maybe some of them want to be here. I think Kane was one of those guys that kind of wanted to be here, but at the same time, he knew he had a job um, at USC. So I think he kind of had to take it. So I think that's going to be something that's very interesting, and it's a very interesting dynamic to understand um, how that will kind of manifest itself over these first couple of years, especially as Oklahoma gets their staff in here early on. And so it's something to keep an eye on, kind of keeping one eye on the recruiting trail, and then another eye on the coaching hires, and what's announced, and what maybe is happening behind the scenes, but that's not prevalent right now. But I think a lot of the going back to some of the Clemson folks, specifically Todd Bates and Mike Reed. I think there's some thoughts that I'd heard through a source of mine that had said that that neither one of them are part of the co-defensive coordinator group for the bowl game that Dabo has pegged. So the thought is if either neither one of those are co-defensive coordinators for this for their bowl game, does that lend itself to saying that both of those individuals are headed towards Oklahoma?
It is a difficult situation for these assistant coaches because these head coaches, obviously, they come and go. They take jobs. They're courted. We've seen everything transpire at all these major schools over the past few weeks. And I don't know that we've seen this type of activity with these big of jobs involved in a long, long time, all in one off season. But then comes with that, to your point, is let's say you're an assistant coach at Oklahoma and you enjoy the school, the players, your family's entrenched, they're in the community. You enjoy everything about the experience at Oklahoma. And for the most part, your thinking is that even though Lincoln Riley went to USC and you were offered a job, you would like to stay at Oklahoma and just would be able to probably work with just about any other head coach that comes in and be fine with that and just have a new boss. But you don't know if they're going to come in with the approach that they're going to blindly clean house and just want to bring in their own staff. So you don't know if you have a job. So just for safety purposes, you got to think that a lot of people do follow the previous head coach just for job security, and that's totally understandable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's interesting, obviously Oklahoma bringing in a very strong defensive minded head coach. You have to kind of assume to a certain degree that he wanted to have more of a hand on who he's going to have as part of that staff. Whereas, obviously he knows offense. You've got to know offense to be able to coach defense at a high level. But obviously that's not his forte. So I think he's probably going to rely on someone, like a Jeff Levy that has been really, really strong on the offensive side, and then keep a lot of those guys intact that have been, because offense traditionally over the last 5 years, specifically under Riley, hasn't been the issue. It's been more of on the defensive side. So I think that doesn't it doesn't make it's not that surprising when you look at it. But yeah, it's such a crazy and weird situation for these staff members to be in, and really don't blame them for leaving and deciding to leave, and outside of just kind of being in limbo, stuff like that. So I think that's part of the uncertainty and unfortunateness of the of coaching changes, especially in a quick manner.